You gotta put your mic on first.
Gotta put my mic on.
You have mic on.
I gotta put the mic on.
Mic on. Okay, don't pull a Christian and put the lit end in my mouth. Okay.
Right before I hit record, I almost put the lit end in my mouth.
Yeah, it's not
That's
good.
what you don't want to do.
Don't do that. We are the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast.
Are we? We're old.
Well, yeah.
And we're dads, so I guess that makes sense.
Yep. Here we are.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast. We are going to try and entertain you and give you practical tips, and we're going to smoke a cigar, and, Christian's going to drink a whiskey. I'm going to watch him very jealously. I can't even speak right now. Enviously.
It's like you're buzzed, but you're not. It's weird.
I know, not even that. So, grab your own whiskey, because I definitely don't have any, and we're going to get into this. We are the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast, seeking to love dads and men through the person and work of Jesus Christ, while entering into tough conversations on marriage, mental health, sex, and parenting, all while sipping good whiskey. So, Christian, you have whiskey, you have a nice cigar.
I do. And because we're lazy, we're batch recording these, and so I'm still drinking the same whiskey I was drinking from last week. Haven't stopped. Hudson Baby Bourbon Whiskey.
Yep.
Which is from where? Bright, Kentucky?
No, this is from New York.
New York City?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was from 2018. I'm reading some of the stuff on the bottle as I go.
That's good.
Batch 24, bottle 8,922.
Oh, that's
for
good.
all you nerds out there.
It's a good batch.
Yeah, super batch. Not as good as maybe bottle number 8,921, but yeah, anywho.
But it gets the job done.
A good whiskey, you can find it at least up here in the P&W, Seattle area. Pretty reasonably priced. $50 or so.
Yeah.
What are you smoking?
I'm still smoking the same cigar from last week's episode.
Wow.
Cigar
That cigar's
Obsession.
lasted
It has
long
lasted
time.
me, and I'm so buzzed from this thing. Cigar Obsession. First and third, something like that. So I don't know anything about this. I'm gonna throw this one to the cigar experience. I'm drawing a
No,
blank.
this one actually, I think,
Would
it's
they
not
know?
from one of our normals like Standard and Twain or My Cigar Pack.
Yeah.
But this is from a fan that sent me a whole big pack of cigars. A fan of denim and whiskey.
Oh, I was saying, we don't have any fans. It must be from your
I know.
Instagram page. I don't think we have any listeners.
No, I mean,
Except
after
for
this episode,
except for
we
my
won't have any listeners.
except for my mom. Thanks for listening, Mom.
All right, so why don't we jump into what we're going to talk about? So we're going to kind of continue the trend of doing a little shorter episodes and a little more digestible and trying to be a bit more practical, somewhat entertaining on this. So we are going to talk about how to deal with your child's, kids, adolescents' challenging behavior. Because no parent, if I'm right, has kids with challenging behavior. Do they?
No, none.
No.
Nope, they're all perfect little angels that listen every time without question.
Yeah, so I'm kind of approaching this a little bit more from a professional sense, since that is what I typically do in my office, my counseling work. So I'm a child mental health specialist according to the state of Washington. But I do work a lot with children, and I've done a lot of child developmental courses and specialties, trainings and whatnot. So that's kind of my designation here in Washington. So I thought I'd offer up some stuff and just have some dialogue, since both of us are dads and both of us have kiddos, and
We do.
each of our kids probably have some challenging behavior.
A bit. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too off topic. How long have you been licensed as a mental health counselor or therapist?
Great question. I have been licensed, drumroll. I might be going on 8 years now.
And your oldest kid is?
10.
Okay. So I guess my reason for asking that is, did you see a big difference between your parenting pre-being licensed and post-being licensed? You know, like things you learned and picked up, or do you still struggle with the same dad issues as us normal mortals?
Some of our normal. I think I still struggle with parenting issues. I think there are some still similar ones. Like getting my kid to listen to me, on the first or even second time, as opposed to like the 15th time. But I think that in having met with a lot of families, a lot of parents, and coaching a lot of different kids, I would go home often after those, like a long day of meeting with like 5, 6, maybe 8 families, and I would be like, man, I just told a lot of parents, like, this is what you should be doing. I analyzed a lot of kids. I assessed what the issues and problems were. I said, you need to do this. Here's the way to problem solve and troubleshoot what's going on. And I always kind of put the burden of responsibility back on the parent. And so I walked away from that going, shoot, if I'm not doing this, then I should not be telling parents what to do.
Okay. So was the result of that a growing imposter syndrome, or were you actually able to implement the things you're telling your patients, your clients to do?
So to be clear, I still think there's a bit of imposter syndrome that is happening with me.
It's just being human.
But I think I have grown in patience, which I used to kind of undervalue a lot. Now I value it a lot more because I think it allows me to enter into tough conversations and tough situations with my kids, especially when like they're not being compliant. They're showing challenging behavior. Like there was a period of time where my oldest daughter was going through like slamming doors and hitting her sister quite a bit, and she wouldn't listen to reason. And there are times where I would have to literally go and hold her tight in her room, sit her down, and she'd be yelling, screaming, and trying to headbutt me and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I was like, I've been in these situations before with other kids when I used to work for public mental health agencies, where I'd go into homes and I'd help assess, and the kids were like literally punching holes in walls, and the parents had no idea what to do because they're just tapped out.
Sure.
So I thought it might be good to talk a little bit. Yeah, have some whiskey.
Oh, thank you.
About stuff that I've learned, or maybe just offer some practical tips. And I know that you've got some practical stuff too. I mean, you've been a dad, now for like 20 years, right? Feels like that, probably.
I mean, there might be some kids out there I don't know about, but just kidding, mostly.
Joking.
Going on 10 years. Our son will be 10 in March. So I'm recording this beginning of January. Yes, I mean, with those challenges, I mean, how did you bring your kids into compliance? Because that's our main goal as parents, right? Is compliant, well-mannered kids.
Yeah, so, I mean,
Or maybe it's not.
Maybe
that's not our goal.
Little adults.
Yeah.
Make them little adults.
Yep.
So I think that one thing, as a dad, that you can, not just you, but all dads, including myself, so I say that as much to you as to me, is you need to understand why your kid is doing the behavior that they're doing. The challenging behavior. And it's good to identify, like, well, why do we call it a challenging behavior? So if it's not a challenging behavior, then what is it? It's adaptive.
Okay. Now, when you say challenging behavior, are we talking like they just don't listen, or they're defiant? They understand and they're defiant against your will. Like, are you kind of lumping that all together, or you see those as separate things?
Well, you can look at challenging behavior term as an umbrella, and there's a lot that could go under as subterms. You know, so challenging behavior can be broken down in like all these little subcategories, and every kid's personality is different, and they're going to grab onto challenging behaviors that are, honestly more attractive to them.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, my wife might categorize some of my behavior as challenging. So
So it's good as a father to know, hey, why is my kid doing what he or she is doing? Because it's really easy as a dad and as a mom to come in and go, you need to just stop doing that because I said so.
Wait, that's not the best technique?
You could do that, but
it's not super effective in my experience.
It might be tantamount to like punching a brick wall over and over again until you're like, well, this is probably not working.
Right, until you're bloody and the wall hasn't moved.
Yeah, it might seem like you're making some progress, and then eventually you're like, well, my hand can't feel anything more, and my fingers are broken.
Sure. So, I mean, what direction you want to take this conversation with kind of that initial premise of what do you do when your kid is exhibiting challenging behavior? Because obviously we could go down all sorts of rabbit holes, and I mean we could do tons of episodes on this. Yeah,
so dealing with the challenging behavior is actually an interesting and maybe counterintuitive way to build relationship with your kids. You know, we don't look at it as that as dads. We look at it as this is really inconvenient.
Mm-hmm.
This is really not what I want to be dealing with. Say at a long day, I don't want to be dealing with your challenging behavior at 10 o'clock at night, or when I have something else that I want to do. But from my perspective, both as a dad and as a professional, I've seen it as a great relationship building activity, because you are literally entering into, on a very intimate level, what they're dealing with. You know, what may be stressing them out, what may be causing the challenging behavior. Because all behavior, as far as psychology is concerned, all behavior happens for a reason. It doesn't happen for no reason. We just might not know what the reason is.
Sure, and our kid probably doesn't know what the reason is.
No, right, and that's where the teaching comes in as a dad and as a mom. But we oftentimes default as dads to, look, I don't care whatever your reason is for engaging the way that you are in challenging behavior. I just want compliance, which can oftentimes lead to lack of relationship building.
Right. Well, and depending on your kid's personality, they may fall into compliance because they want to please you, which on the surface seems good, but in the long run will probably lead to some issues and rebellion later on, or identity issues or whatever. I mean, I don't have that problem because my kid doesn't care what I think. But I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, because what I've been learning, I'll kind of give my 2 cents.
Yeah.
In my most recent challenges with my son's behavior, what I've been learning is my wife is making me read this book called, I think I mentioned it a couple episodes ago, No Drama Discipline.
Yeah.
And a big part of it is recognizing that your kid is not a fully functioning adult. They don't think like you do. And so while to us it may seem clear what their motivation for acting out or whatever it is, they're not cognitively thinking about it. They're probably just responding to disappointments, to things not going their way in a way that we'd consider childish, which by definition it is. But I've learned, or I'm in the process of learning, starting with empathy. Now, it doesn't mean you let them get away with it. There's consequences and stuff, but starting with empathy will de-escalate things the most to where you can get to a spot of getting them calmed down so you can actually have a conversation.
Right.
Because my tendency is to just put the hammer down and consequence, which, funny enough, does not lead to de-escalation. It actually escalates things. My son will already be in a state of emotional distress, and then there's a jet in the background we have to talk over. And then when I lay on, okay, you're not complying, you're not doing what we want, okay, here's a consequence. Okay, now they explode even more. Like, you're not going to be able to have a conversation that leads to anything, you know? And so I'm finding kind of the empathizing with them is like, I understand that you not being able to do this thing is really disappointing, and I understand how you would feel here, and trying to use kind of a framework of like kind of naming what they're disappointed in, taming it, so like having some techniques for like, okay, take some deep breaths, or maybe like clench all of your muscles really tight together, go punch a punching bag, which we have set up right over there.
Ride a bike.
Ride a bike, get some activity. Our son's very active, and so he definitely needs a lot of activity to be able to sit or concentrate or learn or whatever. And then reframing it. It's like, okay, yes, you want to go to in our case, like you want to go to the train store today, and we can't do that today, but you got to look forward to doing that tomorrow or next week or whatever. So we're not saying no, we're just saying later, or like, oh, you want one more story? That's great. I really appreciate that you like stories and you're creative, and we will do that, but we're going to do it tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And so just kind of reframing that as opposed to just no, do what I say because I'm your dad.
And I think what you're describing is I think something that many dads and go through, and I've seen it in my office, and I've experienced it myself, is we're focused on like the position of father and position of instructor, and so our kids get to a certain age where we just kind of expect them to listen, and And sometimes when you're dealing with an overly challenging kid, like, you don't want to take the position of, okay, I want to try and empathize, I want to try and understand, I want, because it just is like their challenging behavior is like being waterboarded sometimes. Like it's like, look, I don't want to I don't want to enter into whatever their struggle is. I just want them to listen. And sometimes bringing the hammer down, it just simply feels better, feels good. And likely, oftentimes it doesn't yield a good result,
right?
Like you're saying.
Right. Well, and I think that's a great point. It's like we have to, in dealing with our kids and discipline and challenging behavior, we have to understand our own hearts and our proclivity. Because I think so much of parenting, unfortunately, centers around, like you're saying, our desire for them to not get in the way of whatever we want.
Yeah.
And they're working out of the same thing, but their prefrontal cortex isn't processing and thinking.
That's right.
Isn't thinking consequences and long term or any of that stuff. They're just like, oh, I can't do what I want. I'm going to freak out. And so I think that's important because I think the reason that I and maybe a lot of dads don't respond well to our kids disobeying us or not listening is because we interpret that as, well, now they're questioning my authority. Now they're disrespecting me.
There's a personal aspect that's hit.
Right. When our kids aren't cognitively thinking, I'm going to disrespect my dad. I'm going to give him the proverbial middle finger.
Right.
And so we're then acting like a child and responding the same way they are.
Yeah.
Instead of being the adult and trying to point them to Christ and help them understand that, that their challenges they're experiencing right now are the same challenges we have, which is we don't trust in the goodness of God and are not obeying out of that. And we just had this conversation this morning with our son about how we have the same problem. Like we don't trust God, and therefore we don't listen, and that's our challenge.
Right.
And as a kid, we want him to love and worship and trust God through trusting us.
Yeah.
That God has what's best in mind for us, and we have what's best in mind for him, and we want him to thrive and flourish.
Right.
And when he's choosing not to, he's choosing destruction and folly and that sort of thing. Now, I mean, using those biblical terms to a 9-year-old is probably going over their head. And my tendency is to use too many words. My wife's just like, no, just be quiet, just stop talking. But that's what it looks like for us right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of going about it. And I like what you said, like empathizing. And because I think that ties into what I was going to mention is like, when you're dealing with your kids' challenging behavior, there's kind of a format, at least from a clinical and psychological level. I'm not necessarily going to go into here, but in an effort to keep it concise, we have to, as dads, be detectives.
Yeah.
We have to kind of have a vested interest in what's going on in our kid's life, not just simply from like, well, I know what's going on in my kid's life based on what my wife texts me, and then what I see, when I come home from work, and then maybe on the weekends. Like, we have to have a vested interest, and we have to know what makes our kids tick, and we have to actually be spending time with them. And so, like, our kids are either going to learn that dad wants to listen, or dad's not interested in listening because of, hey, all he expected out of us was compliance.
Right. Well, in that vein, I mean, I haven't really thought this out, so this could be totally bogus. But as we're talking, I mean, it's really like one of my friends, like Jason Van Heusen, we had him on as a guest, and he's, I'm going to say one of my mentors or whatever, but I look up to him in how he parents.
Man, you respect your father, respect him.
I respect him, and he cooks well and provides me whiskey, so, we're buddies. No, but we're good friends with him, but I always liked kind of his approach is like, I treat my kids like an adult. I treat them with respect and expect things out of them. I don't coddle them, and I guess the translation of that is, when you're leading with empathy and stuff, I mean, like, if you have a job that deals with other people, I mean, it's human psychology, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're in a meeting with someone and they have an idea and you want to go in a different direction, you don't just be like, that's stupid, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
You say, hey, that's a good idea, maybe that'd work here, but this is what I'm thinking. Like,
right.
You're connecting, you're validating, you're empathizing, and then you're offering other options or other choices. Like, if you treat your kid the same way, like, it's going to work a lot better, because like that's kind of how God built us.
Yeah, and I think this perspective or this approach can be implemented in many other areas of your life. Like, say, sexual intimacy, financial management, your career, your own spiritual development with Christ, your walk there. It's taking time to build the relationship with your kids so that they view you as like, hey, I do trust Dad, and having kind of the perspective of the expectation, or accepting that like your kids are gonna have challenging behavior, like they simply are, like that is kind of a product of where they are. Sure. On a developmental perspective.
Well, and we should expect that. We shouldn't be surprised by it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is our expectations as to how we're going to respond to them.
Right. And so I think a really, really big step in dealing with challenging behavior as a dad of your kid is you got to be in their life. And you have to be a detective because all that behavior isn't happening simply because they want to get under your skin. That might be an element in there, but largely it's because, hey, they found a way to do something that they think is convenient for them. They don't care if it's inconvenient for you.
Sure, they're not thinking any of that stuff. They're just like, this is what I want to do in this moment.
Yeah, like, hey, hitting my sister gets the attention that I want from Dad, then it's up to us to teach, like, hey, here's a better way to get attention. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, and I think you kind of touched on that was nice, is when you're dealing with your kid in a challenging behavior crisis, like you can't coach and teach at that particular moment.
Right. You've got to wait for the waters to simmer down.
You got to get back to neutral.
Yeah.
You got to get back to baseline, to zero. And I would say that in general, there's about a 24-hour, maybe 12 to 24-hour period, window of when your kid is going to be receptive to teaching. But if you go beyond that, you might lose them and you might miss that teaching opportunity.
Sure. Well, and something that's been helpful for me, we before we got married, we did some pre-marriage counseling, and then and some of the, I guess one of the things I'd say, if you don't have like older parents or mentors or Christians in your life, like seek that out.
Yeah.
Is there something over there?
I thought there was.
One of the couples in our lives, when we got married, their kids were growing out of the house, and one of the things they said that was really helpful for them is they had a no flinch rule. Doesn't matter what their kids come to them with, they're not gonna flinch, they're not gonna react, they're not gonna overreact.
Kind of show their hand a little bit.
Right, and I thought that was really good because essentially, if you're always like reacting negatively or emotionally to what your kids bring to you or to what they're doing, like they're not going to trust you. And when they get into their teen years, they're not going to come to you because they know, well, Mom and Dad, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what they're going to say.
Right.
Versus, they come to you like, hey, what's this? I heard this word at school today. What's that mean?
Right.
That's, especially as Christians, like that's what we want, because what they're going to be learning in public schools or out in the world is probably not in line with what God's calling us to bring them up to know and love God.
And that's an excellent example of why dealing with challenging behavior is kind of this counterintuitive way of relationship building. Like we're not looking to come down on them with the hammer of God, because that oftentimes doesn't yield building of relationship. That oftentimes will increase defiance and or fear.
Right. Well, and that doesn't. And I will say, because my initial hesitation in this, when my wife was, initially kind of saying to me, my pushback was, well, what, we would just let them get away with everything? There's no discipline, like,
yeah.
But it's not that. It's that the discipline, the consequences don't come when they're raging emotionally. You wait for them to calm down. You have that discussion. You calmly say, okay, well, because of this, because of your decision, to respond poorly or not listen or disobey, whatever it is, this is the consequence. And you have that discussion when they're calm, not when they're amped up.
Right.
And that's much more effective in actually the goal of discipline, which is to correct their action and their heart.
Yeah. So, in kind of summing up everything that we've talked about is that challenging behavior isn't necessarily inconvenient to the kid that's displaying it. It might be inconvenient to the dads, right? But it's up to the dad, because God's given us our kids to steward, and we got to be detectives. We got to be invested. We got to know what's going on. When your kid's in the middle of a behavior crisis, that's not the time to do teaching. That's the time to help get back to zero.
Right.
And that 12 to 24 hour, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a general suggestion. That's an opportunity to do teaching. Don't let those moments go by.
Right.
You know, also be regularly in the Word and with other veteran dads to help examine your own heart in what you're doing. Because if you're a dad, like it benefits you nothing to be kind of this island of oasis, or not even oasis, just this island out in the middle of the ocean where you're just parenting your kid. Like, we need to learn from other dads, like you're saying. You know, so I think dads walking away from this, be a detective, be invested, and seek to empathize, like you said. And it's going to be slow, but it does yield return in terms of relationship.
Right. Well, and I'll say, kind of in closing, I mean, and practically speaking, make sure you're intentionally having these discussions with your spouse. You want to be on the same page because your kid, you know, from 2 on, understands how to work parents against each other. And that's been a huge source of conflict for us. Is like, my son will come to me, he's like, well, mom said this. And then he'll go to, you know, my wife and say, well, dad said this. And like, and so we have to, you know, one of the things we're kind of doing right now, you know, thanks to one of your business partners and, you know, some counseling we did, is like, we're writing a list of like our family like rules. Like this is the structure that my kid can depend on, as opposed to the arbitrary, like in the moment we're laying down the law and rules and you know, stuff. So that it's very clear that, like, okay, this is what we expect out of you, and if that doesn't happen, here's the consequence. And that's been helpful to us, just kind of getting on the same page. And sometimes that's going to mean kind of getting to your point of, we're disciplining to redirect, you know, the heart, which will lead to their behavior. And sometimes that's going to mean your inconvenience. Sometimes it's going to mean you're late to church or to a meeting or getting out the door, because your kid is more important than, you know, being a few minutes late to church, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, dads, that's our lesson for today. I hope that something stood out to you. It's a good reminder to me. I know that's probably a good reminder to you.
It is.
Yeah.
Got some repenting to do.
Yep. Convicted right over here. Big time. I hope you enjoyed your whiskey wherever you are. And I certainly did not enjoy my whiskey because I did not have any. But I enjoyed the cigar that I have. Continue to find us on the socials, YouTube, Instagram.
Subscribe. Follow
Facebook.
us.
Follow us. We would love a rating, because that helps us get our message.
Preferably a good one. 5 stars is nice.
Yeah, 6 if possible. But until next time, dads, we love you. We care about you. We're praying for you. Have a good rest of your week.